Chapter 2. Maybe More Than Enough. March 18th. Paul? Sirius screeched, turning sharply onto the highway. Remus slid across the bench seat, steadying himself with a hand on the door before laughing. He nodded solemnly. Paul. Sirius was quiet for another moment before he bit his lip, smirking. And what about Marlene? Remus nods again. Yes. No. She quit not soon after you left. Sirius scoffed. I bet she just missed me too much. I missed her, you know. Her and those nice set of pads, Remus groaned. What? Sirius threw his hands up, and Remus tightened his grip on the door. Sirius Black was a scary driver. Not necessarily a bad driver, but scary. But the odd thing about it was he was graceful about it. Played it off like he meant to drive like shit. Utterly unaware of how horribly he was driving. It wasn't quite unsafe, but it garnered a few middle fingers and nasty looks from passerbys. Eyes on the road. You're going to kill us. Everything Sirius did was graceful, Remus opposed. Even clipping curbs or slamming over speed bumps. It's hard, okay, Moons? If you have never noticed, I'm not the tallest, and sometimes I can't see over the top of the hood. The curbs just appear. Despite the fact that Sirius was, indeed, not the tallest, only standing high enough to reach the underside of Remus's chin, which he always found too endearing. Now that Remus was sitting in the truck, watching him drive around in the giant hunk of metal, he honestly couldn't see him driving anything else. He had always told Remus he wanted a truck, which seemed a bit too on the nose and southern for someone like Sirius, but it was a sight to behold, truthfully. The way his fingers reached up and shifted gears, the way his knees sat, his left leg resting slightly open and against the driver's side door, the arch of his back and the turn of his head when he went to merge lanes, the way he would lift his hair away from his neck before leaning back against the seat and looking over at Remus. He had taken his jacket off somewhere between Dermot and Justisburg, which, if Remus were being honest, was not enough time to prepare himself for what he saw. Sirius was wearing a plain gray shirt, faded from the years with too many holes to where it was a wonder it was still holding itself together. Tight black pants that Remus could not look at. He just couldn't. He couldn't because it was like fucking Pavlov's dog, and his mouth started watering the moment his eyes moved further and further towards the inseam. Way too much spit had collected in his mouth, and he swallowed hard, coughing a few times, and turned to stare out the window instead. Sirius's handful of rings knocked against the steering wheel in stereo any time he went to move, and he wore the same exact pair of Doc Martens he had always had, utterly hideous and forever stuck, not still in place. It was all terribly distracting. Like some sort of Jezebel, Remus felt like a sinner in church. Like the devil himself sat next to him, tempting him with lean muscles and loose shirts that fell off his shoulders, enticing with the smell of cigarettes, and a spliff hung limply out of Sirius's mouth as he spoke, gesturing wildly with his hands that were not on the steering wheel. It was utterly indecent, but not the most obscene of all, because Remus's musing about all those years before, about the tattoo Sirius got being the first of many, had been right. Sirius was covered. Almost every inch of skin he could see was covered in tattoos. And somewhere between Lubbock and the end of the second playthrough of The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust, Remus had already cataloged them all. Thoroughly. Where his shirt had fallen off his shoulder, and Sirius had not adjusted it yet, much to Remus's disdain, he could see the coiled end of a snake tail. The dark black contrasted against his pale skin, which was bold, harsh, and thick. It disappeared around his back and under the sleeve of his right arm, followed by an odd-looking sheep, what Remus had first thought was a lamb, outlined on his inner forearm. A white sheep and a black family, Moons, Sirius had mumbled in response when Remus had gathered enough of his wits to ask about it. Bite me was tattooed right in the junction where his neck met his shoulder, and Remus had suppressed a groan, forcefully shoving his fist into his mouth. Sirius's knuckles, which were white, gripped the steering wheel with the word disgrace plastered across them. Another moon, Remus felt sick, was tattooed on the tip of his finger, tapping the steering wheel along to the beat of the song playing. A single ace card was tattooed on the back of his forearm, woven around some flowers, and after scratching his arm enough to ride up the sleeve of his shirt and finally fix the falling shoulder, thank God, Remus saw the tattoo that he couldn't help but laugh out loud at. A classic mom tattoo, an arrow through the heart, but it had been crossed out with "fuck you" written above it in big scratchy lettering. Walburga, what an unfortunate name, honestly, was something else, and Remus figured she garnered a big, massive "fuck you" if he had anything to say about it. The devil incarnate, not in a good way, a she-devil. The most incompetent human being to ever be a mother, the list goes on and on. Too many nights, Sirius had called Remus, on the verge of tears he would never admit to, looking for company and someone to talk to. But Remus always knew what it meant when he woke up the Sirius sneaking in the back door. It had always suggested that the yelling had been taken too far or the blame had been misplaced. In Remus's eyes, Sirius's father was not much better and equally unfit to be a parent. He had only met him once, but Orion's scrutiny would have melted Remus to the ground had he not been made of slightly tougher stuff. That, met with the face-splitting, literally, punch he had thrown and landed across Remus's mug, was big enough to rattle Remus's brain and make him understand, even a bit, what Sirius had dealt with his entire life. Remus had driven home that night, the week Sirius had left, smearing blood across his face with tears in his eyes. Not from the pain or the blood dripping into them, but from having experienced only a fraction of what Sirius had, which broke him. Not because it hurt. It did, though, hurt like a bitch. But because he couldn't fathom someone doing the same to the person he loved. He had cleaned the cut with shaky hands, snapped that nose back into place, and wished more than anything he could hug Sirius, squeeze away all the years of pain and absorb them or something, because if anyone deserved love, and only love, it was Sirius. He hated the scar across his face for no reason other than it was just a cat scratch compared to what Sirius had to heal. Both of the unfortunately named shit stains of human beings had given birth to Sirius, one of the best people in the world, and Remus was not biased on that, and Regulus, who, for all intents and purposes, was the shining star of the family. Only because he seemed to actually have been born from Sirius's Satan of a mother, like father, like son. Nature versus nurture was a bitch, and sometimes if you looked at Regulus and Sirius next to each other, you'd wonder how they came out so different. Regulus was a stand-byer, someone who stood by and turned a blind eye to most, which included the crying phone calls, the anger that had been taken too far, and the general care for his brother in a way that was appalling. Regulus didn't see the purple bruises and gashes, didn't see the blows land, and didn't see an issue with it, apparently. And Remus had prayed, begged, and screamed and cried for that man to come back to town one day so he could have a moment alone with him. He was a few years older than both of them, had graduated the year they went into high school, and thankfully left town as soon as he could. Destined for greater things, Regulus had said once, and Remus remembered laughing and Sirius giggling, and both of them deciding the bigger and better things were just terrorizing the world and women that had inhabited it somewhere else, far, far away from them, and that was fine. So, Sirius dragged out the word, slowly turning his head to look at Remus. How was graduation? Remus laughed. I don't remember really. I stayed long enough to get my diploma and then left. Big plans that night? Sirius lifted his brows, and Remus shifted, leaning against the door to face him. No, you know me. There were after parties. Remus pushed his hair back away from his face. Actually, yeah, there were a bunch of after parties, and it was a pretty big deal. Cops were called on a few of them. The Nolan County Sheriff was out all night. No fucking way. The Greengrasses? Remus nodded. Yeah, a few kids ended up driving around after, drunk, and ran into a lamppost. No one was hurt, but it was a big deal. Their asses were only saved because Astoria's father, she was in the car, donates to the sheriff's posse every year. No fucking way. Sirius's eyes widened, and he glanced between Remus and the road. Astoria? Drunk? That's what I said, but it was in the papers. Not her name, but word got around pretty fast. I heard a few talking about it at work the week after. No shit, Sirius whistled. The few weeks after graduation were actually the worst. Remus had been stumbling around like he didn't know his left from his right, or up from down without Sirius. It had always been their plan to leave after, and when he found himself on his own, with no one there to help or even say, "This is fine, we will figure it out," Remus had very quickly slipped into a mean bout of depression. He had always been a bit of a lonesome person, but looking back, that had been the loneliest month of his life. He started smoking more, which didn't help, but helped him sleep, which was second best, and went to work. He drank a six-pack on his days off and listened to music, and spent every bit of the day by himself. The only time he ventured out was to fight. He always assumed Orion's punch that one fateful evening knocked loose something in his brain, and it bounced around and pressed against the wrong spots, and Remus longed for that feeling well after the scar had healed. It started innocently enough, him remembering the adrenaline rush from the moments after Orion's fist crunched his nose. The thoughts that followed were a messy mix of brain matter, the same that had been knocked loose, most of them concerning the pain blooming behind his eyes, but also the anger and pride because Sirius was not there to defend himself, to stand up against, or weather the harsh words his father had been spitting like venom, and it had burned Remus to hear them, and like a snake himself, he had struck. The adrenaline was addictive, and within the next few weeks, the rumors had started, and Remus was an opportunist at heart. That prick Black finally left town. I say good. He was always a bit of a tight ass. Remus had driven home with a broken nose again that night. His family will probably stick him in the fanciest school up there, but that doesn't mean shit. He's still going to end up washed up, probably on drugs. Remus had gotten a nasty gash across his chest that evening, courtesy of a smashed beer bottle. The list went on, and it was like some sort of poetic love letter to Sirius. The scars littering his face and chest and arms and fingers and everywhere, really. Sirius would never know, but Remus remembered each moment and the anger, which had become addictive. He went home each night, nursed his wounds, and became very well known for being a troublemaker in his town, and sat and thought about the next night and where he could possibly go to get his fill. Nobody got away with saying anything about Sirius. As far as Remus was concerned, he was the only person in town that was allowed to say his name, speak it, or think of him, or even consider him fleetingly. He did enough of that for the entirety of Texas, anyway. How about you? How was New York? Sirius took a deep breath and leaned against the window, staring straight ahead. It was okay. It's okay. Remus's brows drew in confusion. Just okay? Come on, Pads. You've got to give me more than that. I mean, it's fun. The big city and all. Lots of clubs and nights out and people. And I mean, it's wild. He shook his head. Places are open past 8, and it blew my mind, but it was a lot. It was silent in the car for a while before he spoke again. Dad died last year, which, Mooney, he glanced at Remus. Don't even say it. I'm glad that sack of shit is gone. But he was sick, and got sick right after we moved. Remus just hummed because he had been going to say sorry, but honestly, he wasn't sorry at all. Orion Black was rotting in hell. Remus might have said he hoped he was rotting in hell, but if there was any justice in the world, the man was being flayed alive at that very moment. If anything, Remus was more concerned about the conflicting feelings Sirius had to have had about it. His father was awful, but he was still his parent, and he could imagine losing one, no matter how they were to you, had to bring up some sort of feelings. Half of what you were born from was gone, somewhere that probably counted for something. Ma was angry. Sirius gave Remus a sideways glance. which is always fun. It got worse, Remus said quietly, and Sirius shook his head, nodding slowly. Oh yeah, it got worse. Like, crack your head open worse, which was fun. He grimaced at the word. I mean, I like to think I'm a people person. I've been known to woo. But showing up in the middle of the year to a school 3 times the size of ours had been with a massive fucking knot on your head and stitches. Well, Sirius sucked on his teeth. There's only so much that charm can do. The elephant in the room dropped down on them both and took the breath out of Remus because, why didn't you call me? I wasn't there. I wasn't there for you, but I couldn't have been. But I would have been. Always. The people weren't nice? Oh, no. Yeah, they were great. Really. Sirius reached in front of Remus, grabbing his smokes off the dash. He fumbled around the seat for his lighter before Remus handed it to him. He lit up and took a long drag. Sirius's face was blank for a moment, and he stared ahead at the passing highway, an empty landscape speeding by. He bit his lip and then turned to Remus again, and it was like everything was fine. Whatever had been troubling him was gone in an instant. But there's no you. There's only one Moony in the world. Sirius winked before biting the cigarette between his teeth and slapping his hands on the steering wheel. I don't know about you, but I want something to drink. And honestly, I don't remember the last time I ate. I pretty much drove straight here. And I'm pretty sure we're going to need a map because I'm shit with directions. And I spilled beer on mine about halfway here. And I need to piss. You haven't slept? Sirius rolled his eyes. I napped. They pulled over at a small gas station off Route 84. Sirius made an absolutely horrendous attempt at parallel parking, which was laughable. Remus had laughed. And then he hit him on the arm, which effectively shut Remus up because Sirius needed to stop touching him. Keep his hands to himself, for the love of God. There was a moment of silence after the driver's side door closed and before Remus got out, where he sighed. A huge fucking heavy sigh, and pulled on his hair because what on earth was he thinking? Stuck in the car with Sirius for how long? God only knew, and he loved it. Remus really and truly did, but it was like giving candy to a fucking baby and then telling him he can't have it, can't eat it. Remus shook his head, fearfully aware of the analogy and where it would take his mind. He got out of the car and stopped. Life was cruel. Who on earth invented pants so tight? In truth, Remus hoped they were locked up, repenting for their sins and being punished for their crimes. He followed Sirius, keeping his eyesight above the man in front of him. He settled on the crown of Sirius's hair, which did little to help because it was just so shiny and soft and long. And it was windy, like the wind was a fucking paid actor working as if rent was due to the next day. Remus watched Sirius reach up and pull some hair away from his face, all slim and long fingers and chipped nail polish. And it was oddly erotic in a way that clashed with the dingy and sad and small gas station they found themselves in at the time. Life was so fucking cruel. How dare it? Sirius headed to the drinks, bending down, fucking hell, and grabbed a bottle of Coke. Remus grabbed one before snagging a bag of chips and waving Sirius off as he went to the bathroom. He came back, mumbling about no more pissing on the side of the highway, and grabbed a few packs of Pop Rocks and a map on his way up to the register. Now, there was some small part of Remus's brain that acknowledged that 2 men, he supposed looking like them, Remus wasn't the poshest or most put-together looking lad around, pulling up together in a big truck and knocking elbows as Remus waited for Sirius to pay, may look a bit odd to some. One love and all that. But even though the man checked them out grimaced when he thought no one was looking as he went to grab a couple of packs of smokes for them, Remus found a small part of him a bit giddy at someone thinking they were together. Was that weird? Definitely. Like, so odd. But he took it where he got it. And for all the man in front of him knew, Remus and Sirius were on a sweet lovers trip where they sang sweet songs to each other on the road and curled up in bed at night and did all sorts of awful and debauched, raunchy stuff in the evenings. And you know what? Remus could pretend. It hardly hurt anyone. Sirius paid, and they left. And Remus purposely walked in front of Sirius so as to not get a front row show of his ass in those jeans because his heart couldn't take it. He was sure of that. They got back into the truck, and he handed his Coke bottle to Sirius, who opened it. Sirius had always opened his bottles. It's just how it was, and it made Remus smile and let out a small thanks as Sirius nodded, taking a sip of his own and holding the Coke out to Remus. The bottle cap was tossed on the dash, settling in nicely. Now, devotion is a wild thing. Remus would muse that religious devotion and plain old devotion, reserved for those of not holy status such as Sirius, as much as Remus would argue there has to be a little bit of a god in him somewhere, was a slippery slope. He would know and could wax poetic about how he was forever devoted to the man in front of him. It was just how it was. And Remus had always known Sirius felt the same, which made him smile and feel giddy and cared for and happy and everything warm and fluffy. But as Sirius reached back, arched his back, and lifted to pop open the back window of the truck, Remus choked. Spit his Coke out on himself because of that devotion, because it was blatant and right in front of him, and shoving itself in his face so fucking loud in the form of a tattoo right above Sirius's waistline. Half hidden, resting between those fucking hip bones, in big, bold as hell letters, sat what Remus could only assume was a tattoo that said Mooney. Big, bold letters. So big, really. What is that? Remus said, a slight panic in his voice as he brought his hand up to try and catch the Coke and the drool mixture spilling out of his mouth. What is that? Sirius opened the window and sat back down, giving Remus a strange look. What? That, Remus all but shouted, pointing to Sirius's crotch, which was just an absurd thing to do anyway. My dick? Oh my God, Remus groaned, trying to stop his eyes from going wide. No, the tattoo. Sirius looked down, lifting his shirt, a bit too much, actually, and let out a laugh. Oh. Oh? Remus repeated, sitting up straighter, trying to fix what he really was praying was not the beginning of a hard-on in his pants at the thought of his fucking name, Sirius's name for him, tattooed that close to his dick. Nothing of Remus should be that close to Sirius's dick, for fear of catastrophic consequences. Yet, there he sat, watching as Sirius lifted his ass, lifting, and time seemed to slow, and Remus's mind swirled a bit as Sirius pulled down the waistband of his pants and boxers enough to show him. Yep, sure enough, his name right there. Suppose it's your name, Moons, he said with a shrug. What? I mean... Remus's mouth opened and closed, a few pained and pitiful attempts at words escaping. He landed on, why? Sirius stared at it and pulled his pants down a bit more, and Remus was going to simply pass away because he was getting a front row seat to Sirius's happy trail, just trailing its way along, cutting through his name and leading right down to, I'm not really sure. Sirius cocked his head at the tattoo before snapping his waistband back and sitting down. Missed you one day, went out and ended up with this. He finally looked at Remus and had to have taken in his flushed cheeks. They were flushed. Remus could feel it. It was so fucking hot in this truck. And his wide eyes and frozen posture, and winked. I quite like it. Do you not? It's great. Really nice. Sirius hummed. Thought so too. He reached down, shoving the pile of tapes between them towards Remus. Here, pick something to listen to. Fucking hell, Remus thought, adjusting his head against the door and squeezing his eyes shut. Remus was a big Cat Stevens fan. He really was. And Tea for the Tillerman was definitely in his top 20 albums of all time. Still, after choosing the album, being surprised that Sirius had it, and putting it in, he realized he had put it in upside down. which was fine. But halfway between where they'd been and the border of New Mexico, he got tired. And then Wild World finally came on. It was like a vacuum had sucked the air out of the truck. Remus was tired, worn out, and overwhelmed, which meant it was joint time, which was also fine, but he had not smoked with anyone in a long time. Just like always, things were fine. That word again. Fine. But now he was high and acutely aware of how close his curled up feet were to Sirius's thigh, and how small the fucking truck was, and how he was stuck there with Sirius, that close, for the foreseeable future. He sighed and shifted onto his back, which put his head in an awful angle and gave him a literal front row seat to Sirius driving, which, honestly, fuck it. Remus would indulge. Write it off as being high as hell, which he was, and he knew Sirius knew because Sirius was also high as hell and trying his hardest to drive. They were on back roads, those weird roads that are highways but never important enough to be officially called a highway. The ones where if you were going under 70, you got honked at. Nothing around for miles, and it was peaceful. So damn pleasant. But it would be a lot more peaceful if Remus didn't love Sirius. Another sigh. Sirius turned, eyes lidded. "What's wrong, Huffy?" "I'm not huffing," Remus shot back. "You've huffed like 4 times in the past 5 minutes. Just trying to get comfy." Sirius reached down, wrapped his free hand that was not smoking a cigarette around Remus's leg, horrifyingly, and pulled them onto his lap. In truth, it helped a lot, but also not a ton, because now his legs were straight and barely fit long ways across the cab, and his feet were flat against the door by Sirius. But also it helped a lot. "There, better?" Remus sighed. "Much." Sirius reached over, fumbling near Remus's hip for his candy. He knocked against his guitar, leaning on the passenger floorboard before swerving slightly, glancing at Remus as he found it and snatched it up. Holding the wheel with his knee, he ripped open the package before throwing the tiny piece of trash towards the floor, which instead just floated onto Remus's stomach. Remus was so damn high. His brows were raised, eyes heavy, and mouth fucking dry. Fuck. As he watched Sirius tilt his head back and dump the entire pack of Pop Rocks into his mouth. Remus was a man entranced, just staring and staring at the long expanse of Sirius's neck, that "Bite Me" tattoo on full display. He swallowed. "What flavor?" "What?" Sirius all but shouted, way too loud, and the windows weren't even down. "Sorry, what?" he said, quieter. "What flavor Pop Rocks?" Sirius looked over, sticking his tongue out at Remus, mouth wide to show him the disgusting, not really, mix of spit and red popping candy coating his tongue. "It's cherry," he mumbled before closing his mouth and swishing the candy around. "Want some?" "No." Remus choked out before sinking further into the seat, hoping it would swallow him whole as he closed his eyes. March 19th. "Mooney," Remus grumbled, turning over and shifting. "Moons, wake up." Remus jolted awake, his arm slipping off the bench seat and hitting the floorboard, his fingers skimming the guitar in the process, and he cursed. "Huh? I need you to wake up." That got Remus's brain moving, and he pushed up to a sitting position, wiping the sleep from his eyes. "What's wrong?" It was silent, and Remus pulled his palm away from his face and was met with the wide eyes of Sirius. His hand was half paused, like he was going to check the radio station, fingers even pointed and outstretched, and Remus glanced down at himself, trying to figure out what he was staring at, but found nothing of interest. He reached down, righting his shirt that had ridden up during sleep. "Pads?" "Huh?" Sirius said this time before coughing and jolting back. "Oh, yes." He paused again as he pulled his arm back before pushing his hair back with both hands and falling against the seat. He glanced over at Remus again, a wary look in his eyes. I'm tired. Remus finally glanced around, tearing his eyes away from Sirius, and noted it was dark out. Where are we? About an hour away from hitting New Mexico, if I had to guess. I've been following the road signs, but you fell asleep on the map. Remus glanced down, pulling the flattened map out from under him. Sorry. You're fine. I just can't drive anymore. I'm sleepy. Sirius lolled his head before he chewed his lip again for a moment. He sighed. You ever drive a truck? Remus shrugged. No, but how different can it be? Remus glanced in the side mirror, watching from the passenger seat as Sirius rifled through his things in the back of the truck and pulled out a new shirt. He was shirtless. For some reason, had thought it was a good idea to take his shirt off before he had to get a new one to put on. And Remus got an eyeful of the tattoos littered across his chest and his left side. A fucking bleeding heart was tattooed smack dab in the middle of his chest. What a metaphor. Looking a tad bit fresher than the rest of the tattoos it surrounded. Remus could finally see the entirety of the snake tattoo, which dipped and curved around his shoulder, the head sitting nicely against the dip below his collarbone. Remus closed his eyes and sighed. Over Sirius's heart sat probably the most simple tattoo of all. Somebody in Texas loves me, surrounded by the thick outline of a heart. Good Lord, just take him now. Remus let out a bitter laugh. There was a smattering of black on his back as well, but even Remus leaning out the window a bit did not grant him a better access to see them. Sirius pulled on the new shirt, and Remus looked forward, too resigned to his fate at this point, at how fucking tight it was. Obscene, but he should have expected it. Okay, Sirius said, walking over to lean onto the windowsill. Same as driving anything else. She's just a bit heavier. No power brakes, so you really gotta slam on them. Right, Remus nodded, watching as Sirius fished in his pocket for a spliff before lighting up. You're taller than I am, so we should be safe from curbs and speed bumps when you drive. Sirius shot Remus a look. He took a drag, blowing smoke out through his nose before passing it to Remus. Remus also took a hit, hanging his head against the steering wheel before blowing it out. All right, let's get on with it. Get in. Sirius laughed. Bossy. Remus spit on the end of the roach, letting it burn out before tucking it into the pocket of his shirt. What do you think they're going to play? Sirius said, sighing and leaning back against his little corner of the cab. Honestly, Remus said, taking a drag of his cigarette. Don't particularly care, as long as they play a few songs off of 4. 4? Sirius sat up straighter, turning the music down. 4? What? You don't like 4? Mooney, Sirius sighed, throwing his head back against the window. 3? Come on. Celebration Day? Immigrant song? Since I've been loving you? Remus scoffed. I'm not saying I don't like 3. I just rather hear Stairway to Heaven. Sirius let out an exaggerated scoff right back, tilting his head at Remus. Well, of course they're going to play that. It was silent for another moment before he spoke again. You really prefer 4 to 3? I also like 1 better than 2. Sirius laughed. Everyone likes their first album more than the second. Remus only hummed in response, eyes focused on the road. Don't care what they play. I'm just excited. Beats what I had planned for the summer. Using me for free concert tickets, huh, Moons? You wound me. Sirius threw his hand over his heart, falling against the seat, his head almost in Remus's lap. You're good enough company to keep, I suppose, he smirked, glancing down at Sirius. Just good enough? Sirius quirked a brow. Maybe slightly better than good enough. Wherever mediocre falls. Mediocre is not better than good enough. Debatable. Remus rolled the window down, tossing his cigarette out before rolling it back up and pushing his hair back. So what's the plan anyway? After the show? What do you mean? Sirius reached forward, fiddling with the air on the dash. I mean, we go to see Zeppelin, and then what? Well, I suppose whatever we want. Remus glanced over at Sirius, watching as he used his boot, stretching his leg and towing around the floorboard on the passenger side, and lifted Remus's sweater. He grabbed it off his shoe before throwing it over himself, using it as a blanket. Remus sighed. And how are we paying for all this? How are you paying for all this? Because I'd be more than happy to give you the measly $75 I have to my name, but then I would have nothing to my name, and that's just sad. Sirius laughed, turning to lie on his back and looking up at Remus. Don't worry about the money, Moons. His brows drew together in thought. I suppose after Zeppelin, we just go wherever we want. More shows, different states. I don't know. I figured we would just figure it out. Remus went to respond, but was cut off by Sirius. Turn it up. He nodded towards the radio, shuffling his arms closer to himself where they were cuddled under Remus's sweater. Remus reached over, turning up the radio, and Sirius smiled slightly. He slipped an arm out from under the sweater, lifted his hips, and brought out his packet of cigarettes. Grabbing a cigarette, he lit it. Sirius took a long drag before tilting his head back, resting against the side of Remus's hip. This song always reminded me of you. 'Cause he gets up in the morning and he goes to work at night. Remus smiled despite himself, remembering all the times they had listened to the Kinks the summer before their freshman year. Sirius had given the album to Remus for his birthday, and he doesn't think it left the record player all summer. Many nights had been spent dancing. Sirius loved to dance, despite Remus always poking fun and telling him it was less dancing and more flailing, and doing whatever they wanted and whatever they could get away with as two kids alone. Remus had always thought it was a bit like playing house, and he missed those times. And he's oh so fine, Sirius sang, rocking his head back and forth against Remus's thigh, punctuating the last word by bringing a finger up and poking Remus in the side. March 20th. Remus sighed as he finally drove past the sign welcoming them across state lines. Sirius had fallen asleep not too long ago, and it had slipped well past midnight a bit after that. Remus had been alone with his thoughts, except he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by the soft sound of Sirius shuffling and tossing and turning, using Remus's sweater as a blanket, and his light snores. The road he had been driving on was bumpy as hell, and after the second time he thought Sirius was going to roll off the seat, Remus had watched out for the rougher parts of the road. Those he couldn't avoid, he reached a hand out, steadying Sirius not to let him roll off the seat and knock his head open on the dash. The snoring blended in with the radio, the second time Baby Hold On had come on the radio, and after that, Remus had just turned it off. Eddie Money seemed to be peering into his soul the last few miles of Route 84 before pulling into Vaughn, New Mexico. Eddie knew way too much, it seemed, and Remus was high after smoking half a joint all to himself, and he really didn't want the song to come on again and have to come to any more realizations this early in the morning. Early morning was for driving, trying to clear his mind and not concentrate on the warmth that had permanently seeped into his thigh from Sirius's head. Remus pulled into a small gas station, trying his hardest not to jostle the truck too much as he filled up on gas and bought a new pack of cigarettes. They were out of Reds, so he settled on a pack of Golds for himself and a pack of Southern Cuts for Sirius. Pads. He gently shook Sirius, leaning over to reach him from the driver's side. Remus was exhausted. His ass hurt, his legs felt like lead, and he desperately wanted a bed. Or he would even take a fucking slab of concrete. Anything, really, just to get out of the truck for a while. Sirius only stirred, cuddling into the sweater more, and despite being exhausted, Remus still wanted to throw up at the sight. Sirius. We made it to New Mexico. Do you want me to find a motel? Want a real bed. That was all Sirius said before turning, curling his knees into his chest. Remus nodded, getting back into the car, pulling out, and onto the road. He found a motel not too far down the road that didn't look too terrible. There were only a few missing lights on the sign in front, and it seemed that enough cars were parked outside to warrant it not being some sort of serial killer death trap. Remus got out, walked inside, and spoke to the lovely woman at the front desk, who seemed every bit the type to work a motel front desk, whatever that looked like. It was the lady in front of him currently scowling, and paid for the evening before pulling the truck around to their room. "Wake up," he gently shook Sirius's leg. Sirius sat up, hair askew and sticking up and staticky on one side. "What?" "We're here," Remus said softly, nodding his chin towards the motel room they were parked in front of. "Do you want me to grab the stuff?" "Please," Sirius mumbled as he fumbled around for his pack of cigs. He grabbed his guitar before all but falling out of the truck, taking Remus's sweater with him. Remus grabbed their things from the back, coming around with the key to unlock the door. Sirius was leaning his head against it, barely standing and half awake. He had pulled on Remus's sweater at some point and had the neckline pulled up to cover his nose. Remus unlocked the front door, following behind Sirius as he took a few steps inside and fell onto the bed. Remus set their stuff off to the side, used the bathroom, and took a quick shower. He came out, and his heart nearly burst out of his chest, and he finally, without Eddie Money's words lingering in his mind, truly felt a bit ill. Sirius had fallen asleep exactly where he had fallen. Ankles hanging off, he was lying on his stomach diagonally across the bed, arms crossed out in front of him, his head resting on top of them. Remus sighed, walked over, and grabbed his legs. He tugged and turned Sirius, so he was entirely on the bed. He went to pull off his shoes, but Sirius only kicked his leg out and let out a grunt. Remus cursed under his breath as his boot connected with his shin. "Fine. Shoes stay on." Remus ashed out the joint in the ashtray, glancing through the window at Sirius asleep on the bed. Walking inside, he grabbed Sirius's guitar from the table before slipping back outside and sitting in the chair by their motel door once more. It had been a long time since he had played anything, but Remus was never and would never be as good as Sirius. But sometimes he just wanted to play. It was silent as he stared out at the New Mexico skyline. He could see a few stars, but nothing spectacular. Everything too polluted as the lights still on in the city this late bled into the sky above. Remus's fingers plucked at the chords, playing reasonably well the opening to Over the Hills and Far Away, which was probably the only song he knew well enough to just enjoy playing. No thoughts. His mind barely registered anything besides the gaudy pink and green motel sign in front of him, the vacancy sign, and the weird sensation of happiness buried somewhere deep inside him. Remus messed up a few times, playing the song slower than usual, then faster, only the first opening riff. He played it over and over again, and he thought it reminded him quite a lot of Sirius. Remus didn't know how. He was probably just high, but it reminded him of Sirius nonetheless. And he glanced over his shoulder and noticed the bed was empty and the bathroom light was on. Sirius was tough. Had to be. And it was not something he learned, and more something he had crafted over the years to combat the cards he had been dealt in life. You had to be hard to grow up with a mother like his. You had to be tough to live with a father who punched people without a second thought. You had to construct these walls and these barricades and this armor to protect yourself from the world when you were born being so good. Sirius was good. A good person, a good friend, probably the best friend you could ever have. And when he slept, when his mind went elsewhere, and Remus had stared at Sirius as he headed towards New Mexico earlier that evening, he had smiled to himself because he could still see Sirius in there. Sirius had adapted and overcome, built that armor and the walls so fucking high, but he had never been anything other than himself with Remus, and Remus was proud of that. The fact that he got to see who Sirius actually was an honor, because he was everything you could ever want in a person. Sighing, Remus turned back to the motel sign in front of him, zoning out on the few cars parked under the streetlights that were still on. Remus was also not a singer, but he always wished he was. It seemed therapeutic in a sense, being able to sing your emotions and put them out into a world in a beautiful way that people wanted to listen to. He played the beginning riff again, maybe a tad slower than it was meant to be, before he spoke softly. Hey, lady, you got the love I need. He picked up the tempo, strumming faster as he watched a few cars drive past the highway, their lights flooding the empty road in front of them. Maybe more than enough. Remus turned as he heard the door open, glancing over and taking in Sirius standing, leaning against the doorframe, wearing only his sweater and a pair of boxers. He had finally taken his shoes off. Remus's heart stopped a bit. Stuttered. Paused, if you will. Oh, darling, 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 walk a while with me. There had been a few times as he was driving alone earlier when Remus wondered why he was doing this. Life was dull, yes, but it was hard, so damn hard, to go out of your comfort zone, and as much as Remus hated the town he lived in, it was comfortable. He knew what to expect, how life worked there, and now he was here, and there were so many variables, one of them standing in front of him, and it was terrifying. It had him wanting to run back home and never leave again. But as he looked at Sirius, Remus kind of just got it. Oh, you've got so much, so much, so much. Sank into it fully, and he hadn't realized until that moment that maybe, somewhere deep down, he had been hesitant to be there. Not that he didn't want to, but it was rough, loving the person in front of you so much it had made your chest hurt. It was nothing he would ever willingly choose, following Sirius, and Remus was just lucky that whatever driving force in life made choices for him that it agreed with his heart. It probably made his life a lot easier if he were being honest. It had never been an option not to go on this trip with him. He would have gone regardless of it if there had been any kicking and screaming in his mind. It was as if somehow life had been waiting for Sirius to call, praying he would, so he could dig Remus out of the hole he had crafted around himself. Meticulously. He hadn't dug himself into it. He had built it. Remus had known what he was doing for a long time, the drinking and the fighting and the nights alone. And there Sirius stood, with sleepy eyes, hair a frizzy mess, and wearing the hem of Remus's sweater between his fingers, leaning his head against the doorframe. He gave Remus a small smile like he wanted him to keep playing. Remus looked up at the stars one more time and thought to himself, spoke to those few stars in the sky that were privy to his feelings and aching heart, and said, "Anything for you, always," as he started the song over.
Hey lady, got the love I